So after you have your ink drawing done and it's been transferred to your watercolor paper, what we're going to do next is start adding in some color. So for this, you can do kind of whatever colors you want to do. On our reference picture, it has mostly pinks and yellows, but if you want to do some different colors, that's perfectly fine. I just wouldn't really make them green, obviously, just because our stems and leaves are going to be green. So it's good to have kind of a contrast between like warm colors and cool colors. But you could always do purples or, just different kinds of pinks or oranges. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start off with a pink flower. So Alizarin crimson, which is kind of a darkish red, is a cooler red, so it's really good for making pink if you use a lot of water. And then cadmium red, which is more of this color, is more of a warmer red, so that would be good for more of a orange or just regular fire truck red flower. So I'm going to use my alizarin crimson, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and paint kind of petal by petal. So I'm using the body of my brush and just painting in some of my light pink. And on the very tips of the petals, you want to leave a little bit of white just to add some contrast and have a source of where your light's coming from. And then to add some shadows while it's still wet, I'm going to take my alizarin crimson and add a little Payne's gray, which makes a nice dark kind of red or even purple. And I'm going to drop that in at the bottom of the petal. And then while that one's drying, I don't want to move on to this one. I'm going to instead skip and go to my other petal over here, which these two could be separate petals or you could paint them in the same. That's kind of up to you. And if I have a hard line right here, I could always come in and add a little bit of water to kind of fade it out. And then I would take my darker color again and kind of drop it in at the base of my tulip. And then if a color ends up spreading too far, sometimes you just have to let it do what it's going to do, or you can use your paintbrush to kind of lift a little bit of that color off. You have to make sure you don't lift too much, because lifting sometimes will make it really, really pale and you lose a lot of your color. So I'm going to let those dry, and then what I would do is just move on to some of my other petals, which I could do the same colors, or I could actually maybe do some brighter reds. So for this one, I'm just starting with my kind of cadmium red. And I could do some bright yellows on the very tip. And then as I go towards the bottom, then I would either want to use more of my cadmium red to make it appear darker, or I could mix it with a different color. So that's how it would work on your petals. And then for the leaves, I would use a sap green, which sap green is kind of a nice basic green. And then if I wanted it to be cooler, I could add viridian green, which viridian green is a naturally kind of cooler green. So see, I just added a little bit of my viridian to it, and see now it's a nice cooler green. Or I could always mix my own green. So when you're mixing a green, if I take my cadmium yellow and add a little bit of ultramarine blue to it, it makes kind of a normal, average green, and the more yellow you add, the brighter and more lemony it's going to look, versus the more blue you add, the darker or sometimes the cooler it's going to look. You can also make green using phthalo blue and yellow, and that one's going to be a much cooler blue just because phthalo blue has a lot more green to it. So that's actually really pretty. I'm going to use that. So I just took some phthalo blue and some cadmium yellow. And what I'm going to do first is just once I had done all of my petals, then I would come in and do a light wash of my greens. And then I can make a little bit of a darker green by adding some sap green and phthalo blue together. Or sometimes you can even add a little bit of red. Since red is the complement of green, if you add a little bit of red to your green, it naturally kind of tones it down and neutralizes it. And it also makes it a little bit darker. So if I was trying to mix my dark green, like if I took green, added a little bit of alizarin crimson to it, and then it gets too brown, then what I can do is then add a little bit of blue, and I'd probably have to go back and add more green, and that's a really, really dark green. So, and again, if you didn't want things to blend together, you would want to try and do them separately. And if you go outside the lines, that's perfectly fine. And what's really going to add depth to all of your leaves is having some light washes and some dark washes. So I might start off just by putting light washes everywhere and then coming back in and adding more in my shadow areas. That's kind of a good way to start. And then once I'm completely done, instead of doing a perfect background or all around it, I could take some of my colors that I used in my flowers, and what I could do is, it's pretty watery on my paintbrush, and I could just tap like that to kind of flick some of those colors in there. And if I accidentally got onto my tulip, I could just add a little water to them to lift off some of those colors. I could just leave those in there. You could also do a kind of a hint of sky in your painting. Where I could take a little bit of water and kind of wet a small area. And then I could start adding some blue, which this is cerulean blue, but ultramarine blue and phthalo blue work good too. And I could just kind of put in maybe some little clouds by kind of painting some blue around it. And that kind of gives a hint of sky. But that's kind of few. I'm going to kill my clouds now. And you can also do this where you add a little bit of water to the spots you splattered on. Or you can even splatter into some of the wet paint to make some fun texture. So obviously this isn't done, so I would have all of my petals done, adding more shading, and then, adding some more darks onto my leaves.